Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of Teens in Faith Catholic Conversations. I'm your host Annie, and I am joined by my co-host Gianna.
Hey, what's up?
So before we get into this episode, we wanted to start off with our prayer. O Saint Philomena, Virgin and Martyr, pray for us that, through thy most powerful intercession, we may obtain that purity of mind and heart which leads to the perfect love of God. Amen.
Mhm.
So Gianna, what do we have coming up this episode?
So this episode, we are going to be interviewing Mr. Eberhardt, Annie's dad, who is a cop, and he will share some of his stories. So hopefully that'll be interesting.
Yeah, he's going to tell some fun cop stories, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a Catholic police officer. And he will talk about some weapons, like he's going to mention a gun at one point and then some bad guys, but he does not get deep into it. It's just like little brief mentions. So,
Mhm. Yeah. So Annie, have you been up to anything lately?
not really. I mean, I had to babysit a lot this week, which is pretty fun. And then today we invited all of the kids at my church to come over and swim in our pool. And I think we have 20 kids maybe. So that it was pretty packed. I had to go in the pool and swim with this little 3-year-old girl like 5 different times because she'd want to go in the big pool and then she wanted to go in the small pool. So we had to like switch out a lot. But it was pretty fun. It was nice to like have all of the Catholics over at my house for a while. And then yesterday, my little brother Benjamin, he is very creative. So we have this swing set in our backyard, and he invented a game where you have to take like a little sand shovel and like you have to stand up on your swing and get going, and then you have to like scoop rubber duckies from a bucket like across the swing set. It is me and my brother Benjamin played this weird game for like an hour yesterday, and it is so hard. It is. I don't understand how he comes up with games like that.
That's pretty funny. I don't know. We've been filming a lot. I haven't done much else lately. My life's not that interesting, but yeah, we have a lot of videos coming out. So
Yeah, we're gonna try to upload every Friday.
yeah. We also really loved reading the comments. Each comment that came in, we were so excited to read them. Yeah, just please keep posting comments if you have any. So,
Yeah, reading all the comments, we just always really enjoy reading them. So feel free to leave as many comments as you want. And if you guys ever have any podcast episode ideas, you can email us at teensinfaith@gmail.com.
yep.
Now it's time to interview a police officer I know really well. He's going to talk about being a cop and he's going to talk about being Catholic, and he's my dad. So without further ado, here's Sergeant Everhart.
Thank you, Annie. I'm happy to be on your podcast.
So why don't you start with telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Brandon. I've been a police officer for 16 years, and I have 7 children.
Who's your favorite child?
I don't have favorite kids. It varies on the day, actually. So some days it's this one, some days it's that one, but I love them all the same.
So, first question is, we're wondering, because this is a big stereotype,
Okay.
what is your favorite donut and coffee brand? And like, how did that stereotype get started?
Okay, so I actually don't have a favorite donut, contrary to popular belief. I don't discriminate. I like all the donuts equally. And as
Really?
an expert who's a police officer, it makes me an expert in donuts. One thing I can tell you is that this advice will change your life. Microwave the donut for 10 seconds. Trust me on this. I actually do have a funny donut story. So this was
Okay.
quite a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. Uh, we had a large search party down by the river looking for evidence and stuff. And there was lots of volunteers walking the riverbank. And me being, wanting to help and volunteer, I was told, all right, you're going to be in the command post. And I only had 2 jobs. My only jobs were I was supposed to secure any evidence that was going to be found, because that would become a crime scene and we would have to treat it and do uh, evidence processes with it. And then my other job was, if the media shows up, tell them that there's going to be a press briefing at 2 o'clock and tell them where the press briefing was going to be. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, this is the easiest job ever. I'm just sitting around waiting. I don't even have to do anything. Well, there was a lot of volunteers there. So eventually the Red Cross showed up and they brought a trailer, and they had food and donuts and everything for all the volunteers. And someone came over and they said, hey, is the officer over here? There's donuts over there. So I went over to the Red Cross trailer And I took 2 donuts, one for now, one for later. And then I get a knock on the door of the trailer where the Red Cross folks were at, and they say, "Hey, is the police officer in there? There's someone out here that needs to talk to him." And I'm thinking, "Oh, it's probably nobody." So I walk out the door of the trailer and I'm holding 2 donuts, one in each hand, and it's the media. There's news cameras pointed in my face. And my reaction while holding 1 donut in each hand, in uniform, mind you, was, "Oh no, oh no, this isn't good. Are you recording?" And luckily they weren't. And they were actually pretty nice about it. They laughed. I laughed. And they said, "I wish we were recording, but no, we're not." And so I told them when the press conference was going to be, and that was it. So,
That would not have been a good look for you, Dad.
so I try, it's not always possible, but I try to avoid eating donuts in uniform just because of the stereotype. But the stereotype actually exists for a reason. The reason being is back in the day, in the not very distant past, the only restaurants that were open at night or in the middle of the night, early morning, was donut shops. So that's where police officers who have to work overnights would go to get coffee and donuts. And that was their only option. So when you drove by, typically you'd see some squad cars parked at the local donut shop. That's how the
That's
state.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
So what are some pros about being a Catholic cop and some cons about it?
Some of the pros about being a Catholic cop are you get to help people and you get to have a sense of service and a sense of duty, which I think are all good things for a Catholic to have. You put others in front of yourself, and I think those are good principles that men should have. And you get to do those on a fairly regular basis. And you kind of lose sight of that from time to time. But it becomes really important to keep your mind on those things when you're out there doing it, because the day in and day out job can get old and can get tiresome and can get tedious, and having to deal with some of the things that police officers have to deal with. It's important to keep that perspective of service towards others. So even like when major critical incidents happen, the national standard, our standard for our agency, and the national standard now when it comes to the priority of life is number 1 is victims, number 2 is innocent bystanders or uninvolved people, and then number 3 is police officers. So even per directive, our policy when it comes to big situations like that is putting others in front of yourself. So that's one of the big pros. Another pro is that you never know what you're going to do on a daily basis. So, as a patrol officer, you respond to whatever calls come in. And it could be, something really major and really serious, or it could be somebody calling to complain about the neighbor's dog. And so you just don't know what it'll be. And so you never know what your day's going to be like when you go to work.
That sounds pretty intense, but it also sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I like it. The other thing in terms of cons is, I guess, always dealing with people when they're at their worst. And that's hard. That can be hard from time to time. I think when I first became a police officer, I had a really positive outlook on the world around me and around people in general. But you learn pretty quick of man's fallen nature, right? So people, there but by the grace of God, are we not giving in to those temptations and things like that other people have and that we have ourselves? God helps us, and through God's grace, we're able to overcome that. And a lot of people, sometimes don't participate in God's grace and make bad decisions. And it's important to not view those people as being any less, or view yourself as being any better than anybody, because that is something that I think a lot of police officers struggle with. But from a Catholic perspective, it did kind of change my outlook on the world in general. So you do start to see man's fallen nature. People are capable of anything, and know that you yourself are the same way, right? Having those temptations that people give into, doesn't make them a bad person, right? All the saints had, a lot of the great saints had major temptations, but it was asking God for help with those and offering up those temptations that, help us to overcome that. So, I think seeing that on a daily basis can give you a negative attitude. Uh, but I think when you keep it in perspective, and I think especially when you keep it into a Catholic worldview, it makes it a lot easier to deal with. It makes dealing with people that have maybe done really bad things, a lot easier to deal with. The other thing that I think is really hard is I have 7 kids. So when I come home to talk about my day, it becomes difficult because my priest told me years and years and years ago, he was giving me great advice. And he was talking about protecting our kids from kind of the ugliness and a lot of the bad things in the world. And he said, try to keep it as Leave It to Beaver as possible. And none of the teenagers know what Leave It to Beaver is. It was a show where there's white picket fences and good things happen. And, that was kind of the analogy that he gave me and said, provide that world to your children as much as you can. Well, that's not the world that I work in. And so me coming home and telling stories, for my job, I always have to try to be more prudent and know who's listening, know who my audience is. And so Annie, for example, has been blessed with excellent hearing. So if she's anywhere in the house, the basement, the garage, it doesn't matter. If I'm talking to my wife about my day or about, what I saw at work, Annie can hear. So I always have to keep
This
that
is
in
true.
mind. So, that is something that I think I've gotten a lot better at as years have gone on. So,
So going off of that, would you say it's hard to like turn off cop mode when you're home? Because obviously when you're a cop, you have to be more stern and like, you know what I mean? And would you say it's like hard to turn off cop mode like when you're around your kids and stuff?
yes, yes and no. Sometimes what happens is I'll start to, you know, normalize the way I interact with people at work. And, maybe I will have to yell at someone, or maybe I will have to, give commands to someone. And obviously, I don't want to be doing that to my kids. So there are some times where, my wife will say, Brandon, I think you're interrogating the kids like a suspect. And I don't even realize that I'm doing it. So I do try to keep that in mind. The other thing that's really important to remember is that while police officers might deal with, a lot of very stressful situations, it doesn't minimize any of the stress that anyone else feels. And it's just a matter of perspective. So, prime example, and I was several years onto the job. I had a really busy day at work. There was a really sad and difficult case where, some kids were not being taken care of by their parents. We ended up taking people to jail on it. And then there was, a terrible car crash. And so this was all before noon. And these were all my reports. And so I was already kind of buried in paperwork and I was kind of in uh, emergency response mode. So when my wife called me while I was at work, she said, Brandon, it's the worst thing ever. It's so bad. It's such an emergency. And, immediately stop. And I go, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she proceeds to tell me, well, Bob's coming over for dinner and I told him I'd make pumpkin pie and I don't have any evaporated milk. And that was her emergency. And I immediately said, okay, hold on. And I paused the phone, put it on mute, and I was like, that doesn't matter. I don't care about the stupid pumpkin pie or the evaporated milk. I never said that to my wife. I said it to no one in the car. And then I took a breath and I said, okay, actually, she's at home with little children. She wants to entertain our elderly neighbor and she wants to make him his favorite pumpkin pie. And the thought of going to the grocery store on short notice with 3 little kids does seem stressful. So I unpaused the phone and I said, it's okay. I've been kind of busy at work. Maybe I can swing by the store on my lunch break. And then she goes, well, how's your day going? And then I told her and she said, oh, I'm sorry. That's it's not that big of a deal. But what I took away from that is that, in terms of not bringing your work home, is that to her it was a big deal, And, I should still be patient and understanding with that rather than immediately assume that because I was dealing with these, bigger problems, so to speak, that they were more important than any of the problems that we were having at the house at the time. Which, when you think about it, that was just my wife being, a good neighbor and a good host and a good mother and a good wife. And she wanted to do this for someone else. So I think if you keep that in perspective, it's a lot easier to turn off cop mode and to remember that it's just a job, right? And my number one job, is as a father, right? To make sure that my kids grow up right, make sure, they learn how to know, love, and serve God, and provide for my family, protect my family. And that makes it easier when you keep that in perspective.
That was a lot of really good advice, to cops and just to people in general. That was very good. So
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about like a cop's point of view and being a Catholic as well, because I don't know too many Catholic cops, so it's really cool to hear from your perspective.
You have two at your mission.
That's true. I do have two on my mission. So moving on to a little brighter note, what is the funniest call that you have ever gotten, or like a scene you've had to go to while you were on duty?
There's actually surprisingly a lot of really funny things that happen.
Oh,
And it all
really?
it all depends on what your sense of humor is and whatever that stuff like that. Well, one kind of I have lots of funny stories, but one of the funny stories is that this was years ago when I first started as a police officer. We got called to a hotel, and there was a guy there who was causing a lot of problems. I can't remember if he was stealing stuff or breaking things, but either way, we knew we were going to have to take him to jail. And we start to escort him back to his room so that he could get all of his belongings so we could get him out of there. And then he takes off running, and he's running down the hallway, and he goes out the side door, and then he grabs one of those big luggage carts and starts riding it like a surfboard. And he was actually going really fast. The impressive thing about it was that he was holding a coffee. He never spilled the drop. Well, he came around the corner and he fell and still didn't spill the coffee and got up and kept running. And by this point, he was around the front of the hotel, and that's right where my squad car was. And we had the old Crown Vics at the time, which is just a type of cop car. But he ran up to my squad car and he tried to get into the back seat. And he was pulling on the door. And that's when I grabbed him and, we tackled him and put him in handcuffs. But I remember thinking, if my back seat would have been open and he would have been running from us and just ran right into the back of the cop car, that would have been really funny.
That would have been
Yeah,
amazing.
it would have been,
yes.
super easy. Well, fast forward, and that story stuck with me. I was like, ooh, that was a missed opportunity. Well, fast forward probably 5 years, and we have to go to this truck stop. I don't remember why we're taking this guy to jail, but either way, there was other officers that were chasing him. And I kind of showed up late to the call, and he'd been running all over in between these semis, and they just couldn't catch him because he was really fast. And he started to go out onto the road, and he was running away from the cops that were trying to catch him. And I pulled up. I pulled up right next to him, and I yelled out my window. I said, "Get in! The cops are coming!" And he opened up my backseat door, and he got in, and he shut the door on himself. So because I remembered that first time, I was like, I'm not going to waste this opportunity. And, everyone was on the radio, and they're saying, do you have him? Are you secure with him? And I get on the radio and say, yep, he's in my backseat. I got him. So we're good to go.
So all these guys were chasing him, and you were just had to like pull up in
I
your
just
car?
pulled up in my car, and he got right in the back seat on his own.
That's great. That's
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
funny.
So I've had a couple kind of stories like that before, where there was another time where me and my partner went to this building, and this guy had just hurt somebody, and so he needed to go to jail. And we ended up seeing who he was, and immediately my partner goes, "That's him, that's the guy," and then he takes off running. And they get on this huge foot pursuit. I mean, we're talking, they're going over fences, around bushes, through multiple yards. Me, on the other hand, I go back to my squad car and I start driving. And it was impressive. I was driving behind swing sets and missing clotheslines and above ground pools. And eventually my partner says, "Oh, we're at the brown house with the white fence, and I see the brown house, see the white fence. Yep, this is where they're at. So I turn off my squad car, turn all the lights off, turn the engine off, and I go around. I ran about 30 feet for this, keep in mind. I ran around to the side. He comes over the fence. I grab him, put him into custody. Then he looks up at me and he goes, "Oh, wow, you're so fast. How did you catch me? You're so fast." And I look at him, and then he looks back at me. He goes, "You're not even tired." And I thought about walking him to my squad car, which was about 30 feet away. But instead, I decided we'd walk him all the way back to my partner's squad car, who, by the way, my partner was very, very tired at this time because they just got into an epic foot pursuit. And so as we're walking him back, he goes, "You're not even tired." And I look at him and I go, "It's called cardio. You should try it." So,
Wow.
so yeah, that was kind of fun. So somewhere out there, there's a guy who remembers 10 years ago that this police officer got into a huge foot pursuit and caught him. And little does he know, I actually only ran about 30 feet. So,
I mean,
Yeah.
hey, whatever you got to do to catch him.
yep.
What's the fastest speeding ticket you have ever had to give out?
So typically speaking, the speeding ticket is once you get fast enough, it's no longer a speeding ticket anymore. So like if you're just speeding, a little bit over, and when I mean a little bit, I mean like 20, 30, 40 miles an hour over, that's usually just going to be a ticket. But if you're fast enough and you're going that fast, so one time, we had someone going about 100 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone while I was sitting there. And they went to jail because that ends up becoming, instead of just a ticket, it becomes a crime. So to answer that, it was about 70 miles per hour over the speed limit. But it wasn't just a ticket. That was a trip to jail. So
Whoa.
yeah, that was pretty fast.
Don't ever speed. Don't ever speed. All right, now we're wondering, so Saint Michael is the patron saint of police officers, and we are wondering, has Saint Michael ever helped you while you were on duty, and do you have like certain prayers you say before you're about to go on like a dangerous call?
Yes. So St. Michael is the patron saint of police officers. And so anytime I'm going to drive to a call and it sounds like it's going to be dangerous, I'll say the prayer to St. Michael. And I didn't always. When I first started, that wasn't a habit of mine until your mother purchased me a St. Michael necklace that was kind of in the shape of a police badge. And she had just got it for me, and I had just put it on. And later in that shift, we went to a call where there was a man who decided that he wanted to ambush some police officers. And it was, pretty dangerous there for a little bit. But when it was all said and done, we found that, he had two guns on him, and the one that we could see and the one we couldn't see. And the one that we couldn't see, it was jammed. And so he had tried to fire it at us, but I credit St. Michael, wasn't able to. So ever since then, I've been quite grateful for that. And anytime we're going to a dangerous call, I will say the prayer to St. Michael. The other one that comes in handy a lot actually is the prayer to St. Anthony, because not only do, police officers enforce the law, but we also go and help people a lot. So sometimes if you have a loved one that goes missing and we go try to find them. So an example of this, that happened this past winter was, there was an elderly gentleman who had dementia, and he walked out, and the family didn't realize that he had left. And it was pretty cold that day. So where we're at, it gets dangerously cold. So it was an emergency. We needed to find him as quick as we could. And we were calling in lots of resources to come and help look for him. And I just thought, let's get St. Anthony on it. Yeah, said the prayer to St. Anthony, said that we could find this gentleman. And, within minutes, we get a call. One of the officers who wasn't even on the call, who was outside the area that we were searching, happened to come across him just randomly within 30 seconds of me finishing that prayer. So,
Wow.
yeah, we got him back to his family, and it was all safe and sound. So, that's happened many times, actually. Just, within the last 2 weeks, I'd say there was another one where Um, there was a little boy, he was about 5 years old, and he was autistic and he couldn't speak, like he was nonverbal. And he had gotten out. And where his house is, there's a coulee and a pond really close by. So, we were all very worried about that. And having learned my lesson, I uh, immediately said the prayer to St. Anthony. And once again, within just a few minutes, we found him. So, and I was quite thankful for that. So, yeah, there's been lots of times in my career where we'll we'll say prayers, given whatever situation that we're in. So, yeah.
That's really crazy.
Yep.
Wow. All right. So last question we have for you is, do you have any more stories you want to share about being a cop or any stories in general?
Any stories in general. Like I said, one of the big things that makes it hard is uh, dealing with the idea of charity, right? And um, being able to have charity towards your fellow man, even when they're doing, things that they shouldn't be doing and, they get caught breaking the law. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, the laws, generally speaking, are based off of the Ten Commandments. And so not judging those people, when you're getting them and treating them with respect, I think, is a way that I've been able to have kind of a positive influence, at least in my community. Um, and that's one of the other things too that I really like about being a police officer is you hear about all the scary things that are happening in the world today, and you might hear about it on the news or other things like that, and it sometimes seems like things are bleak, but from my perspective, I'm doing everything that I can to keep my family safe, my neighborhood safe, my community, and the town that I live in. And so it makes you feel like you can have an active role in that, and you can carry that over into every aspect of your life. Instead of passively accepting bad things and stuff like that, you can take more active role um, to make things better. So, uh, yeah, that's another thing. Another story would be, and I'm going to embarrass my oldest on this one.
Oh, I know this story. This is good. Buckle up.
So he was probably maybe 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, and I was at the grocery store with him. And there was a gentleman walking down the aisle towards us. And this gentleman was completely covered in tattoos. His face was completely covered in tattoos, his neck, his hand. And my son looks up at him. And he was wearing, by the way, I just need to mention this, he was wearing a Denver Broncos uh, baseball hat, a white one that had like leopard type print on it. So uh, my son looks up at him and he goes, "Daddy, is that a bad guy?" And I go, "Oh, I didn't want this guy to get really offended and there to be, you know, an issue." So instead, I said, "Oh, no, no, buddy, Elias, that, you can't tell who a bad guy is based off of what they look like. It's about what they do." And I'm like giving the guy the, "Hey, I'm sorry," and he doesn't say anything. He's like, "Oh, okay." And he walks by. Uh, and then I get down on my son's level and, I try to explain charity and, yes, that guy probably looks scary, but, what matters more is your actions and your deeds, uh, than how just you look. So then I felt pretty good about that. I was like, that was a strong, solid father-son moment that we just had. And then I go to work at 10 o'clock the next night, that same evening. And right out of briefing, I hear that there's a pursuit. So the shift right before us is chasing this car around. And then, so we all pile out of briefing, get in our car, go to help out. And I get there kind of at the tail end, right when this guy had bailed from his car and he was running down this hill. And that's kind of when I got involved again. And right as they're tackling the guy and getting him into custody, I look and I see this white Denver Broncos hat go flying. And then I get up there to help handcuff the guy and it kind of turned him over and I see it's the same guy. and he had a whole bunch of stuff in his car that he should not have had. He had a bunch of warrants out for his arrest. He was, a stolen gun in the car, the whole 9 yards. And so my thought was, well, I always trust your gut when it comes to what your 3 or 4 year old has to say. So he called that one pretty well in the grocery store there. So yeah.
Wow.
I did not tell Elias about the follow up to that story until much later on, years later. So yes.
That's crazy.
That's hilarious. Well, that wraps up our interview with Sergeant Everhart. Thank you so much for coming on, Dad, and we loved having you. We loved all your stories.
Thank you.
So that wraps up episode 3, and thank you guys so much for watching.
Next episode, we're going to be interviewing another teenager, and we'll be talking about St. Philomena since her feast day is coming up.
And like we mentioned last week, the St. Philomena Novena started. And if you guys are having trouble figuring out what to pray for, a very good intention would be to pray for Nigeria because, like we mentioned last episode, Bishop Nakamake has asked for our prayers for Nigeria. And they actually have a church down there named after St. Philomena. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And like we said, our feast day is coming up on August 11th. And we're super excited for that because St. Philomena has done so much for this channel. And yes, as always, God bless and St. Philomena.
Powerful God.
Pray for us.